She was under arrest. Debbie was arrested for that. And in a Saturday night, New York City, we had like 7 homicide policemen in our house.
He said back in the 70s when Debbie was performing for Irene in New York, Todd had an accident with a prop gun and was rushed to the hospital. Can you share the details or that story?
Well, first of all, it wasn't a prop gun. It was actually a real gun. And that was part of the controversy. Is it was a Colt 45 from the old West days. It was a 100-year-old gun. It had blanks in it, and we were watching A Place in the Sun with Shelley Winters, Elizabeth Taylor, Montgomery Clift, and I was moving the gun off of the bed, off onto the side table, and I was watching the TV, and it hit the table. The hammer in those days had no safety, so the hammer and the firing pin rested against the primer on the bullet. The gun went off, it flew across the room, blew a big hole in my leg.
Front page of the New York Post, Picasso dies, and a picture of my brother and my mother in a mink hat. He was sleeping with her as we all slept together, like the Waltons. And he was playing with one of Harry's show guns, and I'm not Japanese. And it went off right next to his junk. I'm like, where did that come from?
And my mother, our ears were ringing, and we ended up rushing me to the hospital. And fortunately, it didn't do any damage. It blew a big hole in my leg, but it didn't do any permanent damage to my leg. And my mother did get arrested. They actually came to the house to get the gun. And they took my mother down and booked her for having a handgun in New York City. And the gun had just been sent to me with all my toys from my room. So I don't think anybody did anything maliciously, but having a handgun in New York City is illegal. And they booked her.
She was under arrest. Debbie was arrested for that. And in a Saturday night, New York City, we had like 7 homicide policemen in our house.
Because they thought she shot her son.
Well, we had a firearm. And then we had to throw away all the pot that was in the house.
And she tells the story that she was with all the prostitutes getting her hands fingerprinted, and she had her little Irene makeup on. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning. And meanwhile, Carrie was at the house with Pinky, our hairdresser, hiding the pot and stuff like that around the house, and panicked that the cops were going to get us for pot. In those days, pot was, especially in New York, is probably a felony. So we were running pretty close. And then the headline the next day in front of the Daily News was Pablo Picasso dies, and then down there's a picture of me in bed, my mother standing next to me, and it says, Todd Fisher shot, Debbie Reynolds arrested. And part of the reason why it started getting characterized like that is when we were at the hospital, Carrie just saw this whole thing like as a big joke. And they had given me Demerol, so I was like very stoned. And the doctor, they were trying to ask me questions, and Carrie was getting involved. And so this cop that was actually literally dressed up like Columbo with the trench coat and the cigar and the whole thing. And he was asking me questions, and I could hardly understand him. And Carrie just chimed up and said, well, I mean, he wouldn't brush his teeth, so she shot him. And so, now of course she was joking, right? But he took her seriously. And then he was like, wanted like details. And like, she's like, no, it's a joke, like no sense of humor. But of course, Carrie, would play with the fast and loose with the facts like that. So anyway, that was the story. And it went on. It took quite a while for that all to heal up, and then the court case got dropped, of course, because it was absurd that nobody was doing anything intentionally there. And segue forward, like 10 years forward, I'm in New York and I flag a cab, and I get into the taxi cab, and the driver is staring at me. We were in a checker cab, very specific looking kind of cab. And he says, I know who you are. And I said, really? He said, okay. He says, and he opens up his glove compartment, and he pulls out the tourniquet that was tied around my leg, all still blood-soaked. And he has me sign it. And so that was, what are the odds of that, getting in the cab with that guy?
You have to ask about Todd this. She didn't call an ambulance. She got a cab. And then Todd got in a cab years later, and the guy said, "Are you Todd Fisher?" Had a bloody cloth. Please ask Todd.
And then just to take it one step further, and we'd like to amplify this always on this show, my mother's favorite line, don't ever let the truth get in the way of a good story. In her book, she actually tells the story as if she got in the cab with the driver and all that, but that never happened to her at all. I had told her the story, but she liked it so much, she just absorbed it. And that's rightly so, because genetically speaking, I mean, I wouldn't be here without her. So anything I am is a direct result of her, therefore shares stories, and they should be interchanged freely. And so never let the truth get in the way of a good story. She put it in her book, I believe, if I'm not mistaken even.
Yeah, never
actually
let
got in
the
print.
truth.
So I always thought that was funny, but I never really cared because, we did share everything.
Debbie had called from the police station and said that, and then I was there too. And then the Post came and, we're trying to put together the story that she shot her son. And she said, yes, and I only can do one more Broadway show. Shot her son for publicity, as one does. And this is the biggest laugh my mother and I had. And she said, yes, and I can only do one more Broadway show because I only could shoot one more child.